Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and I hope all of you are having a great day. Hey, Monday, you're fresh off the weekend, and of course, we are going to have a complete hour of Computer America just for you, where in the second part of the program, we will be doing computer and technology news, depending on how much time we have, and a lot of very interesting stories, and one of the biggest ones, I think, has to do with HBO. Because I think, HBO has really hit its stride. I mean, they've been, killing it with the programming for a number of decades. But at the same time, the new chief communications officer, I want to say, for HBO has claimed that, HBO is due for an overhaul, saying that the company is profitable, but it's not profitable enough and things have to change. So, when you look at their star-studded lineup, you say, wow, I can't believe they're going to change that. And we're going to talk about that. So, hey, stories like that and more in the second part of the program. But in the first part of the program, we will be doing, we have an interview. And, we've talked about the company before. If you listen to our monthly Linux segments, then, hey, we touched on the company lately. Marcel Gagne, of course, featured it as one of his, kind of products to watch on the program. So we decided to get in touch with them and have them on the program to, kind of advocate for themselves. So joining us in the first segment of the show will be a company called Purism. So we'll be talking to them in just a moment, but a couple of things, including computeramerica.com. That is our website. That is our home. And there you will find a link to our guest website or any articles that we do, just anything that if you are distracted, you can of course find there at computeramerica.com. And while you're there, be sure to check out the social media contest brought to you by Logitech. That's it. And also be sure to check out the live video stream brought to you by OWC. So all that and more at Computer America. Check that out. And hey, and just to let you all know, in the coming days, we should have a couple of reviews up for a number of products that that people have sent to us. So be on the lookout for that and more. All right. All that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So joining us today is, as I said before, a company called Purism. And to talk to us about what they do, how they do it, and, talk about why they do it and what a social purpose corporation is. Well, we have Kyle Rankin, and he is the Chief Security Officer for the company. So Kyle, thank you for joining us here on Computer America.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me, Ben.
Our pleasure. So let's, there's a lot to unpack here about what it is that you guys do and the products that you offer. Let's get some background on Purism as a company and then some background on yourself. How did you find yourself working with Purism?
Sure. So in addition to my day job, I do a whole lot of technical writing on the side. So in addition to a number of technical books, I also write a monthly column for Linux Journal and magazine. Mm-hmm. And a couple of years ago, I found out that Purism was doing this crowdfunding campaign for their first 15-inch laptop, and I thought, I read sort of their mission and sort of the goals behind the company of wanting to produce a completely free laptop in terms of, respecting people's privacy, respecting their rights, running free software. So I contacted them for a review unit. And met the CEO in person. We both happened to live in around the same area, mm-hmm. and just got to chatting with him and realized, wow, this guy really believes in free software and believes in the mission of what he's doing here. And so I reviewed the laptop. I'm a small laptop guy myself, so it was a 15-inch laptop, which I kind of put in the sport utility laptop area, a little bit too big for me. But what they were doing, the fit and finish was fantastic and all of that, and I just sort of squirreled it away in the back of my mind that, if they made a smaller laptop, I would be pretty interested. So fast forward a couple of months, they announced the funding campaign for a 13-inch laptop because the 15 was successful, and I reviewed that for Linux Journal. But in that case, not only was it, the right size for me, but they anodized the aluminum to be black, and that, I liked that, sort of the aesthetics of that. And was just really impressed with the hardware to the point that I ended up buying one personally after reviewing it. And from that point on, I just sort of maintained a constant communication with Todd behind the scenes, just sort of talking about the company, trying to help out where I could with advice and other things. And at the beginning of this year, just the situation came up to where it was possible for me to join on and specifically focus on security. And so took the opportunity and so, to go back a little bit, I was also for a year and a half or so on an advisory board there, just again, providing more official advice.
Sure.
So the transition over was a little bit easier. But yeah, so then I started working there in January officially, and been great ever since.
So this has really been a passion project for you, where obviously, and we're going to talk about the mission that that the founder had in mind and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, you really kind of enjoy not just the products, but you enjoy, the operating system behind it and everything else, right?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because pretty much everybody that works here has the same sentiment. Like there's people who are very passionate about free software, very passionate about protecting people's privacy and their security. So it's almost weird in a way that if you're in a company where you're having meetings talking about features, one of the first things that comes up is, well, what are the ethics of adding this feature, and will that protect the users or hurt them? Things like that. Kind of interesting.
What weird questions to ask when you implement changes like that? That's sarcasm there. Obviously, you'd like a lot of companies to, of course, ask the same questions. Let's talk about why Purism as a company. And I'll be honest, this is the first time I've heard of this because this is obviously going to be different than just your basic for-profit company, or we work with a lot of 501c3s here on the show, which are charitable donation or charities. And but this is the first time I've heard of this kind, which is a social purpose corporation. Is that something you just made up? Is that an actual classification of a corporation? And why and what?
Yeah, so it's funny. It sort of falls somewhere in between your classical C corporation and your 501c. And yeah, it's a real designation. It's we're really registered. Like on our site, we have our nice corporate documents published, so you can check it out. But essentially, what it means is that it's a way for a company to be for profit, but also put their mission and their ethics and their social purpose, have it be cemented in their corporate charter. So this type of structure you'll commonly see used for green energy companies because they realize, well, if we're if we're an energy company and we're for profit, what if someone were to come in and say, well, how you could make a lot of profit is buying a lot of coal, which is really cheap, and so to help protect against that, they put in their corporate charter the ethics. In their case, would be something like, we will only use renewable energy sources or something like that. In our case, what we want to make sure is that all of the things that we do are toward the goal of protecting people's freedom and their security and their privacy. So we've captured that in our corporate charter, saying that we will always pick, if we have a choice, we will always pick hardware that runs with purely free software drivers. So there's nothing proprietary in there where you can't inspect within the code, and that in general we will protect security and privacy of our customers as our initial mission.
So the obvious next question would be, a lot of our users, or at least a lot of our listeners, they obviously come from a Windows background. I think most people do, and then they kind of spread out from there. You say that you are in the business of offering high quality privacy, high quality security, freedom. Just as a, let's say, Windows user or Mac user, or something that isn't Linux focused or Purism centric, do we have less security? Are we less private? Are we less, I guess, kind of quote unquote free with our software, with our hardware choices? as opposed to kind of what you're offering. Because, to say that, hey, you could have more privacy using Purism, I think a lot of users out there listening might go, well, aren't I already private? I don't, post my social security number on Facebook. I mean, just using users in general, is technology less private than it used to be?
Sure. Oh, no, that's a great question. So the thing is, a lot of technology companies have discovered over the last decade or two how much value there is in collecting user data and reselling it. There are very large companies that's their core business model, and they make billions. They're billion-dollar companies that are able to primarily pay the bills by doing that. So in some cases there's these ulterior motives, especially if you have a proprietary operating system. Often it will come bundled with if you buy a laptop off the shelf. There's been a lot of news stories in the past about laptops that had been bundled with particularly nasty spyware. Not that a lot of times if you buy a laptop you won't get this weird adware that comes bundled in it from the vendor, but sometimes it's so bad that it makes the news. In one case, I remember Lenovo having this spyware that was particularly nasty, right? And so it's in those cases, because you can't, you have less control over the software that's on the system, and you have to you essentially are required to trust the vendor and required to use what they provide. And since you can't see the source code and you can't modify the source code yourself, or you can't have a community do it, then you're sort of left subject to what they decide to do. And in some cases, some of those companies have decided, well, we can make additional profit if we, in addition to just selling hardware or just selling software, if we also collect some user data and sell it, or use it for pop-up ads or things like that.
Yeah, and you say that it once in a while makes the news, and I would say that maybe weekly we come across a product that is given too many permissions, or a certain company has offered bloatware on on laptops or computers that turns out to be some kind of hidden data mining kind of operation. Like it's if you buy a computer ready build off the shelf, odds are it's going to have some way to track what you do, how you do it. And it's gotten to the point where it's even things like televisions and things like that. So, I mean, completely valid points. We see it here all the time. And then, I guess my next question has to do with the idea of reading kind of source code. So for those of you who kind of tune out the Linux program, Marcel Gagné, obviously talks a lot about the difference between free software and free software, where his is, free as in free speech and free as in free beer. Let's talk about, kind of your philosophy and what you mean by, kind of this idea that you can look at source code, everything open source. I mean, obviously, you're not giving these laptops out for free. You're not giving the operating system. Well, actually, you might give out the operating system for free. But to be clear, in a lot of these cases, when we mention, this idea of free, you mean the idea that you can go in, poke around, look at the source code, see what's happening. Nothing's hidden behind this layer of secrecy that a lot of companies impose.
Right. Yeah. It extends past just the ability for someone to look at the source code, although that's important, that you can see the source code, so you can see what the company or the software developer, whoever, is doing behind the scenes. But it also extends to say that that source code, if it's free software, that anyone else, it's shared with everyone else, so anyone else can take that source code and modify it, as long as they also release it to be free software. So it extends the freedom that way. So yeah, beyond just being able to look at it, also means, for example, if someone were to write free software that was useful to me, but also happened to be spyware. Number one, that doesn't really happen that much but if it did, and the reason it doesn't happen that much is because if it were to happen, one, you could see that it happened because you would see the changes in the source code that allowed spyware. And two, if the community didn't like that part of it, they could easily just take the source code, modify it to remove that spyware section, and re-release it for everyone to use without that part that was damaging people's privacy. And so
right.
Yeah, it's in the case of, for example, for our Pure OS distribution, that's the OS that we ship our laptops with, we have specifically created it to only include free software. So there's no proprietary bits, whether that's a software driver or anything like that. We've specifically both picked our hardware to not have, we don't have any hardware that requires that, and then our OS doesn't include any software that requires that.
No, and of course, we're kind of poking around it here. pureos.net. We'll include a link to that as well. And, as with most Linux distributions, you can, of course, throw that on a DVD and you can try it out for yourself. So that's of course, great to see. You mentioned that many of your products, most recently the 13-inch laptop, I believe you said. We're also going to talk about a phone that you have, the Librem 5, and a number of different laptops. All these were done through crowdsourcing. So I believe most of them were successful, or all of your campaigns were successful. It's great, which, kind of makes my current question redundant. But is there a demand? I mean, obviously there's going to be a community, wrapped around the idea that, the tenets that you described that Purism follows, and, kind of the ethics and morals and the ideals. But I mean, just as a hardware manufacturer, because we have a lot of laptop makers and things like that, is a company such as Purism, which is focused on privacy, security, things like that, is there a need for that kind of hardware to be made, or can't people just kind of take hardware that's being built by other manufacturers and tweak it to the point where Purism, is embodied in that hardware?
Sure. So, there have been, before Purism existed, it's not like we're breaking ground with computers that sell free software and get support for free software. There have been other manufacturers for a long time, where you can buy a laptop and it comes with some version of Linux installed on it, and you can run it and they support it. The difference, though, is that in the case of Purism, one, we're not just taking, some of those companies, they work by taking like a ThinkPad or some other vendor's laptop and then buying a particular configuration of it, putting Linux on it and reselling it. Our focus has been to build the laptop, select all of the laptop components ourselves, not using some prepackaged laptop from someone else, but pick a high quality laptop hardware that's, that's closer to, say, MacBook fit and finish than a very a low-cost netbook, which a lot of people, when they think of some sort of free software laptop, they sort of think of like these little netbooks that are pretty flimsy. So our take has been, if you build it has to be a quality machine. A lot of people, if they're using, this is what you use all day long to do work and everything else. So it has to be nice to work on. It can't feel cheap or flimsy. We've noticed the demand in a couple of areas to start. I mean, it obviously there's appeal from people who want to run free software on a laptop and want it to be supported and know that it works. Because that's the other thing, is a lot of times people will buy a laptop that they like the hardware and they hope it works, and then they go and try to put a distribution on it, and it may or may not work very well. Or half of it will work, but certain features don't work. So there's definitely a market for people who want to buy a laptop and know that it just works out of the box, because it has to be convenient for it to have mass appeal to everybody. So that's one section that we definitely see demand from that section, but that's a given. Most people would expect that. But we've also seen a big interest from the security and privacy community, because there's a lot of people who maybe free software isn't their primary motivation. They may have even not heard of it much, or they've heard of it, but that's not their main interest. Their main interest is they want a computer that is very secure, that they're not having to worry about, spyware, not having to worry about anything about the privacy, and they want one that they can really lock down. And those markets we've seen a lot of interest in those areas as well. Partially, just because we're very open and transparent about what we put in our laptops and the software, but also because of features such as our kill switches, which is sort of like the signature aspect of our hardware, where if you go to anyone who's sort of privacy conscious, you might notice they put like a little sticker on their webcam. Yeah. And the idea behind that, of course, is, well, we hope that someone wouldn't use your webcam without you knowing, but there have been examples of software out there that modify the webcam drivers such that they can use your webcam and the little light doesn't light up, right? And so you have no idea of knowing that someone's spying on you. There's there's whole subcultures around people who try to do this surreptitiously to people's laptops. So a lot of people will put a sticker on, so unless they're using the webcam, it's off. So our approach has been, well, that's nice, but what you're essentially doing when you do that, one, it just blocks it. But what we do is we put a hardware switch on our laptops that when you flip the switch, it severs the circuit between both the webcam and the microphone. So if you're concerned about, both someone recording what's going on in wherever you put your laptop or recording video, we cut both of those off, and not in a software way. There's a lot of laptops that have a software switch, which essentially has the laptop say to the driver, could you pretty please shut it off? And then the driver can come back and say, well, yeah, I promise I totally did. So with a kill switch, when you flip it, we sever the circuit, it's off. You don't have to put a sticker on anything, you know that it's off. And we also add a separate one for the radio. So if you want to, like airport mode, except it actually turns off the hardware itself.
That's pretty and that's very impressive because and just to be clear, that kill switch, that's like flippable. Like it's not like a one-time use. It's like, I'm never going to use this again, and you have no webcam ever. Like it's on off, right? It's not just one time and you like literally sever the cables.
Right. Yeah, it's just on off. So, when I turn on it might, like right now I had been using video conferencing not that long ago, so it's on. But normally when I'm done, I flip the switch off and it's off until I'm ready to do video conferencing again. So it's very convenient. That's the thing. If you can add all kinds of convoluted privacy and security features, but if they're not easy to use and they're not convenient, and if the defaults don't make sense, then your average person won't want to bother with it. If people will kind of put up with putting a sticker over their webcam, kind of, but it's a lot more convenient to just have a switch and have it off, and for a fact that you don't have to worry about it.
Right. Yep. And as one of our chatters said, it's I'm sure that's way more convenient than trying to clean adhesive off of your webcam when you actually do want to use it. It's much simpler. So no, and you said that kind of defines what Purism does, where if you're security, privacy minded, it's not just something that is software wise patched in as an afterthought, but from the ground up. It seems like you've really thought about just kind of the day-to-day usage and what people should be concerned about, and hey, we have an answer for that. It's built right in. So, and we have a question here. Let's see. It was what's something about your current hardware that you would change?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I am pretty pleased with the 13-inch model. That's about the right size. It's at the upper end of how big I would want a laptop. I've come from the old school of really tiny, 10, 11-inch laptops. But so as far as hardware I would change, so the one thing that I had to get used to was I'm a long-term ThinkPad user. Mm-hmm. And so I used that TrackPoint mouse forever. That was, I'm a touch typist, so my fingers are always on home row. And so one thing I really had to get used to was on the Librem laptops, we don't have that little TrackPoint mouse. We just have a touchpad. Now, so I had to get used to it. That said, it's funny, after using the TrackPoint or the touchpad for a while, because it's a nice multi-touch, it's not just some sort of cheap multi-touch mouse, it's like a really nice multi-touch touchpad. Honestly, I kind of got used to it. It's not that bad. That said, I would love to have both, like the why not both approach. It would be great to have a TrackPoint mouse again, just because I know I'm not the only one that just got used to that, having that at your fingertips when you're touch typing. So that would be one thing if I could. And I mean, future revision.
Yeah, and just real quick, I mean, again, talking to Kyle Rankin, he is the chief security officer, and Kyle, I'm not quite sure about how big Purism actually is, but shouldn't you be able to pick up the phone and kind of call the the hardware guy and be like, hey, I'd really like to see this in the next iteration? Or is this like some kind of planning committee? I mean, how close knit is Purism as a company?
Oh, we're definitely super close knit, and these kinds of things pop up. I mean, it's not like I'm the first person to mention that we would love to have a TrackPoint mouse, right? It just comes down to when we're placing these orders. I mean, we are small, and when we're designing new iterations of the hardware, whether these are features that we're going to be able to squeeze in at that point or not, and also of course investigating any outstanding patent concerns or anything like that, which all of that takes time, it takes effort and energy whenever you're adding new features to something. If you're doing pretty standard stuff, you don't have to worry about that as much. A USB port's a USB port.
Right.
But something like that, there's other considerations.
I got you. So, all right. So you definitely like to see that. And by the way, just kind of looking through, the different models. You mentioned you started with the 15, shrunk it down to the 13, and the only one I don't think you've really kind of mentioned is the, and it looks like it's coming soon. It's not available yet, but the Librem 11, which looks to be, I immediately hesitate to call it a full-blown tablet, but rather it's kind of a 11-inch tablet, a full-blown laptop, but it's a 11-inch tablet with a docking station and a keyboard that I'm sure fold up into one kind of pseudo laptop-ish kind of thing. The Librem 11, what niche does that kind of fill for the product lineup?
Yeah, so that was appealing to a certain group that wanted the touchscreen component, and in particular wanted the ability to have a tablet, but one that respected privacy, respected their freedom, and was a secure tablet. But they wanted to either use it because they're graphic artists, and as if you've talked to Marcel before, he's probably talked quite a bit about some of the software that's out there, free software that's out there that helps with graphics and graphical design. There's a huge amount of software out there for that, and so part of it was to provide a product for artists, but because of that, it's not just like your cheap a tablet that you would use to, just to read a book while you're on vacation or something. It's the design. It's aimed to be, you have like full-fledged laptop components in it, and have reasonable, like high quality resources, CPU resources and RAM and things like that.
Right.
So yeah, that's still something that we're working on and hope to have out soon. Trademarked there.
Right.
So, right. But that's the goal, is to have something that someone could conceivably use as a laptop replacement, but it's aimed more towards the graphical artist kind of market.
No, and just looking at that, plenty of battery life. Of course, you have plenty of horsepower, like you said. So because I've seen some of those, some of that software, and especially the ones that kind of render as if it were paint and things like that, can get pretty intensive. So very, very cool. Glad that that's there. And Kyle, I'll say that we have like 2 minutes left, and if you wouldn't mind continuing on the other side of the break with us, I also wanted to get in some conversation about about the phone, the Librem 5 that you're offering as well.
Sure, yeah, I would love to talk about it.
So, all right. So, but before we go to break, as I said, we have a couple minutes, and why don't we go ahead and talk about again the kinds of customers that because we mentioned briefly that it's for people who value security and things like that. And that throws obviously a very broad net. You'd hope that everyone values their security, their privacy, things like that. But there has been this idea that Linux users are strictly web server people, or code monkeys, or very technical minded people. You put in a lot of work here to make Purism in general, not just the operating system, but the products that you provide, look very, look very trendy. Look very much like, not like everything else on the shelf, but like people would expect of a phone, not something that they'd expect, I think, of Linux. Who are your target audience when it comes to Purism?
Honestly, our target audience is everybody, because we don't feel like you should just be some sort of geeky Linux person or a security expert to be able to have security and have privacy and have freedom in your software. So that's the ultimate goal. I mean, the company was started initially because our founder, he had some kids, and he started thinking about, well, when my kids get to a certain age, I'm going to start, letting them use computers and ultimately let them use the phone. And the current state of what was out there, he was really concerned about the privacy and security implications of letting them use our standard computer that might have, spyware on it, might track them with the webcam, things like that. And so that was sort of the initial, push for this, was that he kind of wanted to build something that ultimately, by the time that they were old enough, that they would have an option, an alternative to what was already out there that did protect their privacy and their security and cared about their freedom
So
in that way. And so,
and just real quick, Kyle, we're about to head off into break, and we're going to continue on with this. Right after this, everyone, we're talking to Purism, Kyle Rankin, and everyone, more Computer America right after this. Everyone, stay tuned.
Greece is cheap.
But the airfare costs a fortune.
Paris?
Not much closer, and again, airfare...
What about Puerto Vallarta?
Let's face it, flying anywhere is just too expensive.
Wait, what's this? Low-cost airlines.
With one call to low-cost airlines, you'll drastically slash your travel costs. We're talking insanely low airline prices to any of your favorite destinations. Where would you like to go? London, Rome, Costa Rica, Australia?
Wow, that's cheap.
So why wait? Call now to learn how crazy cheap it is to fly anywhere in the U.S. or international. Our prices are so low, we can't publish them. The only way to get them is to call to instantly hear the most amazing best deals on airline travel. It's that easy. So call now and start packing.
800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. That's 800-215-4461.
We are all Brother Wolf. 10 years ago, a group of locals banded together to create positive change. We took animals into our homes, held adoption events at local retailers, and talked to the community about our mission to help build a no-kill Asheville. A decade later, we have achieved so many victories for animals in need. There's been so much progress, yet there's still so much to do. As part of our year-long celebration, we encourage you to become a member of our special Compassionate Circle program. With a monthly donation of $10 or more, you will have behind-the-scenes access to the work we are doing at Brother Wolf. Our goal is to reach 1,000 members because we receive no government funding. Working together, we can help build and sustain no-kill communities. Learn more at compassionatecircle.bwar.org. We are a 501c3 tax-deductible organization.
And welcome back to the Computer America Show. It is 32 minutes past the hour as we continue on here. And by the way, if you missed any part of today's program so far, we are continuing our talks with Purism. And and if you missed any part of the conversation, feel free to check out the podcast version of Computer America, which is simply today's show in its entirety, rebroadcast wherever podcasts are heard. So you can catch up there. But as I said, we are continuing on Purism. Kyle Rankin, who is the chief security officer for the company. And Kyle, I kind of had to cut you off there, but we were talking about the intended audience. And you mentioned that, the founder had the idea that hopefully by the time his kids were old enough for a laptop or a smartphone or things like that, they have something that was a viable alternative that did value, his own kids' privacy, security, and that he wouldn't just have to kind of throw them into the world of, well, just get an Android phone with untold amount of apps that are unverified or unvetted or things like that. So obviously, this was made with, we keep saying it, but this was made with an ideal in mind.
Exactly, yeah. And so our ultimate goal is to make this, we're aiming to make hardware for everybody, hardware and software for everybody. That's our goal. I mean, obviously, there's a core user base that we would naturally start off with. Linux users or people who are specifically concerned about security and privacy, but we feel like everybody deserves this. But the only way that it would work is if it's convenient to use. So that's why we use a kill switch instead of having telling a user, well, unscrew the screw on the bottom of your laptop and whatever. Because clearly, if you had a technical audience, you would say, well, yeah, they would be willing to do that. But if you want everyone to have control of the privacy, you have to make it simple and easy to use. So, I mean, for instance, we already have, some attorneys that end up who have purchased our hardware because they care about the privacy features, not because they're big free software fans. But, that feature made sense to them to be able to control their webcam.
Makes perfect sense. So, before we even move on to to well, actually, let's go ahead and move on to the the Librem 5, the idea of a security and privacy focused phone. And this one is a little more interesting, I think, because laptops, computers, they're great. That's probably what people spend most of their working day on, and the fact that that can be secure is obviously a wonderful thing. But then you have the idea of a smartphone, and a smartphone, as much as computers are, you mentioned earlier in the program that they found that if they mine user information, that they can then sell it and package it. That's taken to the nth degree, I think, with smartphones, because not only is it, kind of tracking your browsing habits like all or most browsers do, but it has like a GPS tracker, it has a Wi-Fi place, it has, a geotagger. Essentially, the average smartphone can track you infinitely more than your average computer can. So to kind of privatize a laptop is one thing, but to kind of make a private phone is very anti the idea of a smartphone. Talk about the Librem 5. Obviously, this thing was massively successful, raised well over $2 million when it came to funding the whole project. Talk about, kind of, does it run pure OS? What does it run? How does it work? What apps does it use? Just talk about the phone in general.
Sure. Yeah. So, if you look right now, if you want to get some sort of smartphone, which is essentially the most personal computer you have, you put the most sensitive things, if you're going to put them somewhere, that's probably going to be on your smartphone if you carry one, and you're walking around with it. And like you said, it's tracking you, it's collecting all of your photos and geotagging them and everything else. So in our case, right now, if you're going to buy one, you would have two choices, essentially. You would have a phone that's running iOS, and you'd have, which is very closed, of course, so that it doesn't, while it might be reasonably secure, and at least on the outside, Apple has stated that they care about privacy, and they don't have the same financial incentive that, say, Google would have in collecting data. So there is that, but you still are kind of like having to trust that they, are meeting what they say and using your data responsibly. So there's that option. Then you have Android, which, the financial incentive there is clearly to collect data and sell data. I mean, that's how the company makes money, and a lot of app developers make money. So those are your choices. We wanted to provide a third choice, and there really wasn't a strong third choice. But if we just made yet another Android phone, then that wouldn't, there's been a lot of Android security-focused phones out on the market, but they're still running Android, so they still have the fundamental problem of an OS that's built on collecting data.
Right.
So we wanted to have this alternative, and so, the first thing was, on the hardware side, have the ability for the user to control those sensors. So instead of just hoping when you do airplane mode that everything turns off, actually design the phone such that to have kill switches to kill the Wi-Fi, which you would expect, that's easy, but two, to kill the baseband radio. And so, a lot of people may not know that your smartphone has two computers in it. It has a CPU that's for the smartphone functions, and it has a standalone CPU that just handles talking to the cell towers. And that CPU is closed. It runs software that no one really knows what it's running. So even though we, value free hardware and free software, that's a case where we don't have a whole lot of choices. However, we wanted the ability to, if you don't trust that, or you're in a situation where you want to turn that off, you can. Most of the time these days, if you buy a smartphone, you can't. It's baked into the CPU, and you literally can't turn it off. But
right. We
have a kill switch where you flip the switch and it kills the baseband. So it completely turns the cell phone off. So if you're concerned about triangulation from cell towers, because even if the GPS is off, if you're connecting to a cell tower, you can be located via that way. We have another kill switch that will turn off all of your sensors. So if you're concerned about that, you can flip a switch and turn all of those off, and then turn it back on when you actually want to use the sensors. It won't be running Android; it's running pure OS, and we're running a specific user interface that's geared toward phones. We actually are partnering with a couple of different organizations who all, once we announced the campaign and it was successful, a couple of different communities reached out to us and said, hey, we would love to build an interface for this phone. And so we have a couple of different partnerships, not just a default kind of GNOME-based user interface but we have a number of other partnerships with people who will be, coming up with alternative interfaces for it.
Right. And let's say someone has, kind of a laptop and a phone. I mean, you mentioned that they both run off the same operating system. What kind of interplay functionality is there anything where, I know that most apps are kind of hosted in the cloud nowadays. So if you do one, if you access it from anywhere, you get the information, the data. Is there any kind of interplay that you get if you decide to go all in? Or let's say someone does come from a mixed background and they have let's say they use a Macintosh or, an Apple computer at work, and then they have this for their personal life. How easy is it to transfer, kind of their work documents or what have you from one to the other? I mean, just talk about, do your products work only with your other products, or can you kind of interchange these among your different devices?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a great question, because if we made a phone and said, well, the only way that this works is if you buy a laptop, that model already exists out there. We wouldn't really be building anything new if we forced you into using our laptops. And also, that would be against our ethics, as it were. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, no. If you won't need a Librem laptop to use a Librem 5 phone. Our goal is to be as interoperable as humanly possible with other computers. Our limitations are mostly on the side of, if someone's doing something in a proprietary format, that you must use their software only to use it, and we're not running a proprietary software, we might have a limitation there. But otherwise, our goal is to be as interoperable as we can, so that you actually own your device. You're not just leasing it from the company that sold it to you and kind of remotely controls it.
Very, very cool. So obviously, I think the next place to take it, and you can take this for phones or for laptops, but talk about, kind of the free software, because you're right, on our Linux segments, and we even have a segment at Compute America for free software, and a lot of it is developed by the Linux community and, kind of maintained by people who are passionate about, these kinds of free products. But talk about some of the namesakes that people would be concerned about. I mean, just off the top of my head, maybe for productivity, things like maybe like a word processing document or email, or of course, I'm sure you have answers to things like browsers. I mean, just talk about some of the software that, a lot of people ask you, well, does it have XYZ?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the browser is the first thing to hit, just because these days, as much as people have standalone applications, they also very likely do so much of their work in the browser now. I mean, there's a lot of people don't use a standalone email client anymore. They use a web-based one. They don't use a standalone chat program. They use the web-based one. And so, number one, yes, we have, PureOS offers, we call it Pure Browser. It's a version of Firefox that has additional privacy and security add-ons built into it. So, it works just like if you've used Firefox, it would work like that on any website. In addition to that, so for productivity apps, we have the traditional one that you would see is LibreOffice, which is a free word processor, spreadsheet, presentation tool. All of the functionality that you would normally see in Microsoft Office is replicated there. For chat, I mean, at this point, this is, we're decades into the community producing software at this point. So at this point, when I first started in the community maybe 20 years ago, we were scrambling to try to deal with compatibility with certain things. At this point, it's a lot better. For the most part, if you get a document from someone else, you can open it fine. If you want to interoperate with them with some sort of tool, you typically can do that. And especially now that so much has been moved to the web, if you have a reasonably modern web browser, you can do a lot.
Right. And absolutely. So I think the last point that we're going to hit, and again, as the chief security officer for the company, we asked you what you'd like to see from a hardware perspective. Let's talk about, changes from a security perspective, and what new features are you working on, and what would you be excited to, kind of release with, the next generation of hardware? I mean, what's exciting security-wise with Purism?
Sure. So the thing I'm most excited about is working on tamper-evident booting. So the idea behind this is when you turn on your computer, the very first code that your computer runs, can you trust it, or has it been modified by malware? There's been plenty of examples in the past about malware that hides in the BIOS or hides in code that runs when you first turn on the computer, things like that. There have been some other proprietary solutions to that in the past, like Secure Boot's a great example of that, where the way that they work is by providing signatures, and if you want your code to run at boot time, you get Microsoft or a third-party vendor that partners with Microsoft to sign your binary, and only then can you execute it. Well, on our side, obviously, that doesn't sound very free. So we've worked with a project called Heads that allows you to have it's completely free software. So it allows you to test when you turn on the computer, to test all of that code for tampering while having keys that are 100% under the user's control. So you don't have to get it signed by a third party. You can change keys whenever you want. And we just now are about to release a product that we're calling the Librem key, which is a USB security token. You've seen other products that can store GPG keys, the PGP keys on, and things like that, and can do two-factor authentication. We're releasing a product like that will integrate with this. So ultimately, when you turn on your computer, you can, if you select this high-security tamper-evident boot, you can plug in a device, our Librem key, turn it on. If it blinks green, then your BIOS hasn't been tampered with and you can trust it. If it blinks red, somebody's been messing around with your BIOS and you can't trust it. And you better, in the case of an enterprise, a great example of this is I'm flying to a foreign country and I'm an executive. I'm concerned about someone, modifying my laptop, and then when I come back to the corporate network, plugging it in and spreading malware everywhere. And so this way, instead of having them bring a burner laptop that you throw away when they get back, you can have, right, which some people do, and that's great, $400, $500 a pop. But you could instead, use this, and that it's green, green lights flashing, everything's great. You go travel abroad, you come back, and you plug in the key and you turn it on. If it blinks red, then you know that somebody's been messing with your computer, and you can turn in, if you're in the corporate environment, you can turn it over to IT, and they can go through, scrubbing procedures.
Right. No, and we have certainly heard cases like that. I think for the average individual who just, kind of only keeps their laptop at home, probably not a big deal. But no, we've seen the rise of some very intricate, kind of hacks. And I'm not even talking like 0-day hacks, but just, a lot of the hacks that we hear about nowadays are just people who don't update, who don't, kind of change anything. And it's very cool that you have thought about, some of the more common security holes, and you really seem to have an answer to most of them. So I'll go ahead and let you have the last word, Kyle. If people want to find out more about Purism, first of all, where are the products available? And if people want to find out more information about the company, the operating system, or anything else we talked about here today, where can they go?
Sure. So our website is at puri.sm. So Purism is PURI.sm. So we were able to get one of those little top-level domains. So you can go there, and there we have, on the main page, you will see information both about all of our products, and we have a long series of blog posts that kind of talk about what we're working on. We have pages that talk about what we believe in, the fact that we are a social purpose corporation. You can see all of our corporate ethics as we have defined them in our charter. You can read all of that sort of thing, and make sure that it's not just me saying things, but we actually all really believe this, what we're saying. So you just go to that site. It's probably the best place.
All right.
And we're always looking for more people. This is a free community, so we're always looking for more people to help us improve our software and our hardware. So we would certainly love to hear from people.
Absolutely. So we have a link to all that and more at Computer America. And Kyle, I want to thank you for your time. Really nice to have you on. And again, I'm pretty sure that Marcel is a coworker of yours at this point, and I'm glad that he was able to put us in touch with Purism. And it's been a lot of fun hearing about your guys' mission. So hey, thanks for coming on the program.
Absolutely, it's been my pleasure.
All right, have a great one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone. So there he goes. And again, if you want to find out more Purism, we have a link to it in the show notes. So now we are, of course, going to move on to computer and technology news brought to you by OWC. So, yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into it. And actually, one more time, if you missed any part of that interview, it was rather long, but hey, we enjoy when that happens. You can listen to it in its entirety wherever podcasts are heard. So just search Computer America, and we should pop right up with today's show. So here we go. Computer and technology news brought to you by OWC. And again, OWC Digital, if you want to check them out, you can go right there to, again, owcdigital.com, and you can see a bunch of the different products. They have things like, of course, the Thunderblade, one of their newest products, Thunderbolt 3 dual display adapters, USB-C travel dock. They have a lot of things, and again, they all look very stylish, very neat, and of course, work great with a lot of Apple products. So you can check them out there. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and do some computer technology news. So we have a couple of articles. We're not going to be able to get to all of them like we wanted to, but let's hit the high notes. And we're going to try to keep it, mostly positive today. So HBO, I mentioned this way at the beginning. You may have heard a lot of their programming has been receiving a lot of acclaim. They have been doing really, really well, of course, with things like Game of Thrones, with a lot of their other, I believe Westworld is also an HBO product as well. I mean, they could not do better if they tried, I think, when it came to the success of their programming. I think as far as being on an exclusive platform that was for a long time tied directly into the cable platform, they're doing incredibly well. But now we have the newly enthroned Warner Media CEO, John Stankey, who is again he is the Warner Media CEO, and they said that the network must broaden its focus if it wants to maintain proper competitive footing in the fluctuating media landscape. So I'm not quite sure what that means, but let's go ahead and find out. So again, this article from Engadget talking about the fact that with 42 million US subscribers and almost $6 billion in profit over the past 3 years, 29 Primetime Emmy Awards, and they said that it goes without saying, HBO is doing something right. But as we just said, the new communications director, I think, for Time Warner says that things have to change. So they said when AT&T successfully acquired HBO's parent company Time Warner last month, part of the deal included the ability to track and target audiences. And it's this that could be an essential ingredient to Stankey's vision for transforming HBO, which have some people a little concerned about what could become of HBO. So maximizing user engagement, it seems, is especially important for creating better monetization opportunities. Because obviously, if people are retweeting things, if they are following things, if they're talking about things, then they're more likely to, of course, buy into different opportunities that AT&T may present for HBO products. So Stankey revealed that keeping users glued to the screen for longer would allow HBO to peddle new subscriptions and alternative advertising models. Unfortunately, I think that term right there, alternative advertising models. If you've ever seen HBO, one of the high points of HBO is the fact that if you sit down to watch an hour-long episode of Game of Thrones, you're going to be sitting there and watching a continuous hour of Game of Thrones. No ads. It's a beautiful thing. So let's see if that changes. Anyways, at the same time, he's cognizant of the dangers involving in making HBO bigger and better from here onward, saying it's going to be a tough year. It's going to be a lot of work to alter and change direction a little bit. So while Stankey didn't mention Netflix, Hulu, or other streaming rivals outright, he did hint that HBO's business model needs to adapt in order to become what Chairman Richard Plepler described as quote-unquote sustainable. Again, they keep throwing around these terms like it needs to be sustainable, it needs to have a better footing in the future content distribution marketplace, whatever buzzwords they want to throw out. But it's not hard to see that HBO is one of the few actually successful platforms. So for them to keep kind of throwing these around, so quote, "We need hours a day. It's not hours a week, and it's not hours a month. We need hours a day. You are competing with devices that sit in people's hands, that capture their attention every 15 minutes. Obviously, he's talking about the ability to stream onto tablets and phones. So HBO might be facing pressure to add other types of content to its HBO Now service to really flourish. And however, the quality of its programming should never lose their brilliant sheen if the network intends to retain customer loyalty. And I think in a lot of ways, that is one thing HBO really has over even, let's say, Netflix or Hulu, is that HBO has that level of polish. It's, when you talk about quality in television programming, you can see what everyone else is doing, and you can see how it's rehashed ideas. It's throwing the same idea against the wall, seeing what sticks. And at the same time, HBO is not afraid to take risks. Whereas if they truly wanted to use audience engagement numbers and figures and data and statistics, that means that you are taking what works and reiterating upon it instead of innovating, and instead of saying, all right, we are instead going to try this and let's see how it does. Don't get me wrong, HBO has had failures before, but their successes have been so successful because they're willing to, let's take Game of Thrones, for instance, actually put high budget into a medieval, kind of setting, fantasy setting. So I'm afraid that if AT&T really digs their claws in and, really gets in there with HBO and says, here's what you're going to do now, HBO is going to lose what makes HBO so great. And it's just going to become another media distribution platform. So we'll see what happens there. All right, we have time for one more. And trust me, there's a lot of different articles. You should definitely check them out at Computer America. But I wanted to get this next one in because it's been a concern of mine for quite a while now. And I think that even Twitter is finally showing the barest hints at what the real problem with Twitter is. And so this coming to CNBC, and I think that even the investors were fooled at this point, saying that Twitter rebounds after CEO eases concerns about numbers of accounts taken down. So this has to do with the idea that Twitter is full of bots. And if you've ever been on Twitter, I'm sure some of those trending tweets, some of those more successful tweets, maybe a couple of these celebrities can get hundreds of thousands of retweets, but at the same time, odds are those are bots that are really retweeting and being a lot of the active users among Twitter. Well, they said that the company's shares fell about 9.7. The shares fell 9.7% Monday to a low of $42 after Twitter announced that it is suspending more than 1 million accounts a day. That's right, suspending 1 million accounts a day. And they said that the newspaper, citing an unnamed source, reported that the unprecedented takedown rate could impact user metrics for the second quarter. The CEO said that that's not a problem because many of those have not been active for over 30 days. And of course, if they can catch bots as they sign up, then they're never counted in the first place. So essentially, they're saying that, hey, we're taking down 1 million accounts a day, but at the same time, those 1 million accounts weren't even being reported in the first place. So the music means that we're just about done here, but my big point is that a lot of Twitter are actually fake user accounts. So I'm actually very interested in seeing just how popular Twitter actually is if you cleared away the detritus that are fake users. So, I don't know if we're ever going to get a real full number because obviously Twitter has a lot of incentive to not disclose that. But at the same time, it's, when you talk about just the big social media platforms, Twitter's like usually 2, 3, or 4, and I think it's much, much smaller than that. But at any rate, folks, music means that we're done here. Again, I want to thank Purism for coming on the program and talking about their products, talking about privacy, security, and that sort of thing. It was a lot of fun, and happy to have them on. Everyone else, thank you for tuning in to Computer America here. I had a lot of fun with you, and be sure to tune in every day, Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern at computeramerica.com, or listen to us live on IRN. Everyone, have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.